One way of talking about the progression of human civilization would be to say that it is the way in which we've got better and better at controlling the variables within our environment so that we're no longer so much at risk. So we're no longer so much at risk from the weather because we have houses, we have central heating, we have air conditioning, we have regularized our food supply so that we don't have so many famines. We've gained knowledge about sicknesses, illnesses, so that we can guard against them. So that's one way to talk about the endeavour of human civilization, that we're getting better and better at controlling things. Now, having said this, it's true that it's starting to look like things are out of control, and the evils of war, pestilence, unexpected climatic events doesn't seem to have been dealt with as well as we might have thought. But the general point is that by controlling everything, we have made a safer world for ourselves. So in a very civilized place, I don't know what would be an example of a civilized place, but I'm talking about Europe and talking about the developed nations, I suppose. We have obtained this degree of safety so that we know nothing what we think we know. We feel as if it is true that nothing majorly unexpected is going to happen to us because we've regularized our lives that much. Now, if we're coming from a situation of being continuously in peril, continuously at risk, a movement in this direction really seems like a good thing. And to a certain extent it is. But we've incurred a new danger. And the new danger comes out, and this is really just talking about the developed, so-called developed nations. It doesn't apply to most of the human race, really. But it might do if we all get developed, so-called developed. Developed in the sense that making our environment safe and making life more predictable. That it's that there is an unexpected negative to this, an unexpected disadvantage, and that's that the safety which we're actually looking for, the security that we're actually looking for, is inimical to us, really. It's not good for us psychologically. It brings about great suffering. So we avoid one type of suffering and then we incur the other. And in a very rough and ready way, we could say that we've avoided actual danger at the price of incurring neurosis, which is where we feel that we're in danger, or we feel at risk, or we experience suffering, the suffering of insecurity, even though our situation is secure on the face of it, even though the world that we've created for ourselves is secure. So neuroticism is the price we pay for civilization, which is something that people have said. Foucault said something like that, I think, to do with the relationship of civilization and that type of basic unwellness that comes with being too civilized. And it's a hard type of unwellness because we can't point at it and say what it is, but it's actually our that we're too safe, we're too civilized, we're too constrained, regulated, we're too regulated. And that is a state of psychological death, really, being totally regulated. Even though we don't see it, so we might live in a world where there's lots of physical health, good food, everyone behaves reasonably, There isn't. There aren't too many bandits going around. There aren't too many. Isn't too much violence or anything like that. Everything seems on the safe face of it. Maybe we could extend our lifespan, live 250 years. We've dealt with all the major illnesses or health conditions, and that seems like what we're aiming at, is what I'm trying to say. That would be us getting it right. But if we do that, if we do it, or when we do it, we'll find that we've got a very, very big problem. It's a new problem. It's the same problem in appearing in a new way. So we've dodged the bullet as regards the actual risk of existence by getting very, very good at controlling our environments, and instead we've got a world which is actually effectively meaningless to us, effectively sterile. We're so safe now that there's no point in living, even though we're unlikely to see it like that, but we will be suffering. In a way, we could say that when we get rid of all the big worries, the big challenges, all that happens is we experience the mental suffering that comes with reacting to very small challenges as if they were very big challenges. So no matter how much we make our world safer, there's always going to be some little bit of things not quite right, unregulated stuff, random stuff, things not being quite the way we wanted them to. And these little tiny things that aren't quite right are going to cause us every bit as much stress or worry as a really big thing. So in the end, we haven't gained. There's no gain there, obviously. So that's our predicament. And mental health-wise, it could be said, okay, so there's more people suffering from anxiety, and there's more people suffering from what comes up on the radar as psychiatric disorders. There's more people coming up on that radar. And so we could say, well, that is the result of us being too clever and civilizing everything, engineering everything, managing everything. Because what happens when we do that is we create a world. It isn't a world, it's a reflection of how we like things to be. So if our technology is fantastically advanced, then what that really means is that we're able to get things to be the way we want them to be, no matter what. And that sounds like a good thing, but it isn't, because the way we want things to be, or the way we understand things should be, isn't reality. It's just our thoughts. So we've moved into a world of our thoughts. And we could also say that we've moved into the world of the generic, because thoughts are generic. And a world that is made up of our thoughts cannot be anything else than a generic world. There's no such thing as a non-generic thought. Now, it may not be immediately apparent why that should be, because we often would imagine that it's possible to have a unique thought, a fantastic thought, a thought that isn't the same as all the other thoughts that we might have thought or thunk. But that isn't the case. And it's easy to show why it isn't the case, because every single thought that comes along is the result of the mechanical operation of a kind of a black box, a little mechanism. It's a mechanism because it runs on rules, and because it runs on rules, all of its output has to be generic. Everything that comes out of a rule is generic, because that's what a rule is. It says this is allowed, but nothing else is allowed. So it specifies what is allowed. And so in terms of mathematics, you could say, well, this is like a regular number. And we could say, well, this regular number is arrived at by taking the square root of something or other or multiplying it by this, and there's a thing, and then we are multiplying one factor by another factor. So there's a way to produce a regular number. A formula is what I was trying to say. So there's a formula for regularity. And so you can think of the black box or the thinking mind as being, this formula. The formula is what informs it. It is the enactment of a formula. Now, in maths, we know that there's no such thing as a formula for a random number, because if we had a formula for a random number, it wouldn't be random. So the very fact of random meaning that it's random means that there can't be a generic path leading to it. There can be no rule for it. There can be no procedure that we do. We turn this kind of wheel, and at the end of the procedure, the output hops out of the place where the output comes, and it's an irregular number. Any machine always has a generic output, in other words. There can be non-generic stuff in the world, but we don't know how to make it. We don't know how to specify it, because by specifying it, we straight away make it non-unique, non-random. Now, one thing that we do is we try and get rid of the random, because the random is the uncontrolled. It represents risk. We don't know what's going to happen out of the random. So, as a natural function of our desire for security, we try to eliminate randomness. And so we end up with a world with no randomness in it. Near enough. It could be argued that there is this principle that says there's always going to be a little, and this isn't just a principle. It could be shown to be true that there's always a bit of randomness there, no matter what. You'd always find, in the real world, you would always find little bits of randomness, little bits of uncertainty. It can't be gotten rid of. But in the world that we ourselves create, we can create a world made out of regularities, a world that obeys rules, and pretty much we can extinguish the irregular or the eccentric, the chaotic. So then we think that's what we wanted. That's great. We've done what we wanted. We got rid of the random, got rid of chaos. Because chaos is a thing that upsets all our plans, gets in the way of everything. We don't know where chaos leads. That's why it's chaos. We want to know where something leads. That's why we want a formula and not chaos. So the whole momentum is to get to this place where there's no randomness. But then when we do, we discover something very, very unpleasant. Or rather, we don't discover it, but we would if we were alert enough, but we're not alert. Because the reason we're not alert, it's not possible to live in the generic world and be alert, because the generic world, really, you could say that it's like a world where anesthetic gas is pumped at us from every angle in every room, and the generic puts us to sleep, basically. That's what the generic does. It's easy to see why the generic puts us to sleep. If you see one thing you've never seen before, you never expected it, that wakes us up. It's like, whoa. And we wake up for that moment. So the unique wakes us up, if you're paying attention enough to notice that it's unique and not just gloss over it. But then a thing comes, and then a bit later another thing comes, and they're all repetitions or copies of each other or duplicates of each other, which is what the generic world is all about. It's all about basic units being duplicated or replicated, expanded indefinitely. And that's fine, because you can make a world by expanding the basic units. You can make a world out of that, and that's good. You could make a safe world, because there's going to be no randomness in it. That's cool. So that's what we want. And I know I keep on saying this and saying it, but I'm just trying to get my head around it. So then what happens is we do it, and then we're in this world where, well, when we look at things, it's like it's the same old, same old. We've seen it before. It doesn't wake us up. It's like, oh God, another one. And so by constant exposure to regular or generic elements, we don't really have to pay that much attention. And we're justified because a generic element has no depth. It just is what it says on the label. If it had depth, that would mean, well, look into it a bit more deeply and you'll see that it's a thing all of its own that's not like anything else. But the generic's not like that. That's why it's the generic, because it isn't. It's just like a box of Kellogg's cornflakes. That's a generic thing. It doesn't matter how much you look at it. It's just going to be the same. Everyone's the same. So if life is nothing else but a progression of Kellogg's cornflakes boxes, you kind of get a bit blasé about it. Of course. Why wouldn't you get a bit blasé about it? You've seen that before. I've seen that old Kellogg's cornflakes box. Yeah. Maybe the first time I saw it, it was exciting, but it's got a bit old hat now at this stage. So absolutely everything the thinking mind produces as an output is a generic element. So it doesn't matter what it is, it's old, as Krishnamurti would say. It's old stuff. Thought is always old, as Krishnamurti says. Always, always, always. So that puts us to sleep. There's nothing there to see. So we don't stick around being interested because there's nothing to be interested in. It's a sterile situation. We do hang around in this sterile situation, but it's because, peculiarly, we imagine that if we persist in the formulae, the rule-based way of living, the procedures, that our habits are the stuff that we do, which is regular and fits into the generic world, the generic stuff that we do, the generic thoughts that we think, that this will lead to something great. So we put up with the tedium and the wearisomeness and the burden of the generic world because we think that by adapting to this world effectively enough, it'll all be worthwhile because we'll get the payoff, we'll get the good thing, we'll get the bonus that comes with playing the game right. That is such a fundamental thing in our consciousness, such a fundamental belief. We'll do the meaningless thing because the mechanical thing, because something good is going to come out of it. Now, where that all goes wrong, and it does all go wrong, is because nothing ever does come out of the mechanical thing apart from more mechanical things. And so the whole thing is a con. But we never see this. We don't wake up to it. Because the promise of something new or the promise of something great is always there. And it's very attractive, very enticing. The promise doesn't mean it's going to happen. Promise really just means that on some level we know that there's a deficit of the real, if we could put it like that. So on one level we know that there's a deficit of the real, but rather than inwardly relating and saying, yes, my existence is sterile, or my being such as I understand myself is hollow, it's skin deep, it's generic, and experiencing the pain that goes with that, which nobody wants to experience pain so we can flip it around. It's an entirely automatic psychological thing that we flip it around so we experience the deficit of something great in the outside world. So I experience my own inner deficit as wonderful stuff out there in the outside world. So I'm totally orientated to getting this wonderful stuff because I'm driven by this terrible deficit. And so all that happens is I constantly keep on grasping after the phantom of something great, the phantom of something of real value, the phantom of whatever it is, whatever I want to call it, winning, success. will think about it in different ways, have different labels for it, but what I'm really chasing is the same. It's a panacea. It's to make everything right because it isn't right, even though I don't see it like this. So in order to obtain, get my hands on this attractive projection, whatever the hell it is. So I'm sitting here and I'm aware of this possibility, which is the promise of fulfillment. So I want to get it. So what do I do to get there? And because I'm adapted to the generic world, well, I reckon I just have to knuckle down and do the generic stuff, and that'll make it happen. So I invest. It's like doing a job you hate because the pay is good. Only in this case the pay isn't good, because the pay is not good in the mechanical or generic world, because the pay is always in the form of promises and more promises and more promises. And the more adapted we become to the generic world, the more hungry we get, and so the more intensely we are attracted to the projections that we project upon this world, which represent something we really want and really need, and if we get it, it's going to transform everything. And that makes me work even harder at playing the game, which makes me even more hollow of who I really am, lacking in who I really am, even more deficit driven, as Maslow says. So the whole thing is a self-fueling cycle. It can go on and on forever. And all of this comes about for the simple reason that the generic is only skin deep. It contains no substance, no content. There's no content in the generic. So no matter how many generic dinners we eat, we're always still going to be hungry. Now this is a good thing in terms of the game, or in terms of consumer society, because it guarantees that we keep on playing it. We keep on knuckling down and doing what we're supposed to do. It's a good thing for that. It's not a good thing for us, because it just means our existence is completely frustrating, really. So even though we can kid ourselves we're doing well for a while, that's not going to last, because we're not really. We can talk it up, in other words. We can talk up the generic world, and we can allow ourselves to be continually hypnotized by the attractive images which we believe represent some kind of real outcome to our efforts. We can go on like that for a long time. But the underlying situation is that we are trying to do something that can't be done, that never will be done, and we've based all of our happiness on us being able to do it. So we've put everything on hold. I'll be happy when I've done all the things. So, okay, I may not be really living my life now, but I will live my life when I when I win. So, as James Carr says, the finite game player doesn't live to play, they play to live. And yet it's a con, because we never do live. Thanks for watching.